In 1987, a television revival that almost nobody in Hollywood believed in walked onto a Paramount soundstage and quietly rewrote the rules of science fiction TV. Star Trek. The Next Generation took a canceled idea, a skeptical fan base, and a budget built for failure, and turned it into 7 seasons, 178 episodes, 4 feature films, and a legacy that is still expanding decades later. Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Commander Riker, the android Data, Chief Engineer Geordi LaForge, Ship's Counselor Deanna Troi, the Klingon officer Worf, and Dr. Beverly Crusher became some of the most recognizable characters in television history. But almost none of it happened the way fans assume. Behind the calm diplomacy and gleaming corridors was a production that fought through casting disasters, recycled scripts, borrowed music, and internal power struggles that nearly sank the show before it found its footing. Here are 15 facts about The Next Generation that even devoted fans often don't know. Stick around for the very last one, because it involves an actress who got fired, came back, and ended up changing the show for good. Gene Roddenberry had a very specific picture in his head of who should command the new Enterprise. A commanding, classically handsome leading man in the Shatner mold. When producer Robert Justman brought in a bald Shakespearean stage actor from England, Roddenberry's first reaction was blunt disapproval. He reportedly said he didn't want a bald man in the chair. Justman and producer Rick Berman kept pushing anyway, gradually wearing down Roddenberry's resistance. As a condition of letting Stewart return for a final network audition, Roddenberry insisted he wear a hairpiece. So a wig was specially made by a London theatrical wigmaker and flown over for the occasion. Stewart read the scene both with and without it, and Paramount Television president John Pike settled the matter with the now famous verdict: keep the actor, lose the wig. Fans who caught wind of the casting were initially furious that a stage actor with no hair had been given command of the Enterprise. That anger evaporated almost instantly once the show aired. It's hard to picture the Enterprise D bridge without a Klingon standing at tactical, but Worf was a late addition to a series Bible that had originally banned reusing any alien race from the original show, Klingon included. As the concept developed, producers realized that a Klingon serving proudly in a Starfleet uniform sent an enormous message all on its own. Yesterday's enemy was today's ally. The idea was folded in late enough that the bridge set had already been built and the stations assigned, which is part of why Worf spends much of the first season standing rather than seated. Michael Dorn, who won the role, has said he was the last member of the main cast to be hired, and he prepared for the audition by staying completely in character beforehand, silent, serious, and unwilling to joke around with the other actors waiting outside. It worked. Dorn went on to appear as Worf more times than any other actor has played a single character across the Star Trek franchise, spanning The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, feature films, and even a return in Star Trek, Picard. Long before The Next Generation existed, Paramount had developed a full revival of the original series in the late 1970s, known internally as Star Trek Phase 2. Sets were designed, a Bible was written, and scripts were commissioned before the entire project was redirected at the last minute into what became Star Trek, the motion picture. Those unused Phase 2 scripts didn't disappear, they sat in storage. When The Next Generation needed material almost a decade later, producers went back into that archive rather than starting from nothing. The clearest example arrived during a second season, disrupted by the 1988 Writers Guild strike, when a shelved Phase 2 story about a crew member becoming mysteriously pregnant was reworked with Counselor Troi standing in for the character it was originally written for. It became the Season 2 premiere. Roddenberry wasn't inventing an entirely new universe from scratch every week. Sometimes he was simply dusting off blueprints his team had already built. Running a network science fiction show on a television budget meant getting creative about what could be reused rather than rebuilt. The Next Generation leaned heavily on existing Star Trek hardware whenever it could get away with it. One of the more visible examples involves the transporter effect. The circular glass platforms originally used in the 1960s series were removed from their old configuration and reinstalled, inverted, into the ceiling of the new transporter room set. Pieces of Star Trek's earlier film and television production continued getting shuffled between projects for years afterward, for a series that presented itself as a bold step into a shinier 24th century. A surprising amount of what audiences saw on screen had already lived a full production life somewhere else first. The fanfare that opens every episode is lifted from Alexander Courage's theme for the original 1960 series, and the sweeping march that follows, it was composed by Jerry Goldsmith for 1979's Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Series composer Dennis McCarthy had written a brand new opening theme specifically for the next generation, but producers ultimately chose to build the title sequence around the older, more familiar Star Trek music instead. What sounds like one seamless, original piece of music is really a carefully assembled blend of two earlier scores stitched together for a new series. Product of early computer graphics at all. Effects technicians filled a water-filled container with finely ground metallic glitter or confetti, sometimes adding dissolving antacid tablets to create rising bubbles for extra motion, then lit the mixture and filmed it against black. Actors were shot standing still on the transporter pad. The empty set was filmed separately, and the glitter footage was layered over both shots in post-production, along with added light streaks, to produce the finished beam-out effect. It's a wonderfully analog solution disguised as futuristic technology, and it stayed in use for years before fully digital transporter effects eventually took over later in the franchise. Gene Roddenberry held firmly to the belief that by the 24th century, humanity would have evolved past petty interpersonal conflict, and he insisted the Enterprise crew never argue with one another on screen. It was an optimistic vision for the future of humanity and a genuine problem for a weekly drama, since stories built entirely on calm agreement tend to have very little tension. Writers struggled to generate real stakes under the restriction, and the first season is widely regarded, including by people who worked on it, as uneven. Adding to the turmoil, Roddenberry's personal attorney held unusual influence over scripts during this period, with approved drafts sometimes getting rewritten without the original writer's knowledge, contributing to heavy turnover in the writer's room. As Roddenberry's health declined and producers Rick Berman and Michael Piller took on more creative control, the show gradually allowed itself more honest tension between characters, and the series measurably improved once it did. Encounter at Farpoint was originally built around a single central mystery involving the strange alien station at Farpoint, but that story alone didn't fill the 2-hour pilot Paramount wanted. To stretch the runtime, Roddenberry added a second, unrelated storyline, an all-powerful, mischievous being who puts humanity itself on trial. That character, Q, was cast on the strength of actor John Delancey's work on the soap opera Days of Our Lives. Audiences responded to him so strongly that a character invented largely to solve a runtime problem became one of the franchise's most enduring recurring figures, returning across the entire run of the series and appearing again in the show's finale to bookend the story he had opened years earlier. Whoopi Goldberg has said that watching Nichelle Nichols play Lieutenant Uhura on the original Star Trek as a child showed her, in a way almost nothing else on television did at the time, that the future had room for black women in positions of respect. By the late 1980s, Goldberg was an Oscar-nominated star with no professional need to join a syndicated science fiction series, but she reached out to the production herself, wanting a role. According to accounts from those involved, the initial contact wasn't taken seriously, and it reportedly took her friendship with LeVar Burton to convince producers the request was genuine. Roddenberry created the character of Guinan for her, an enigmatic bartender who exists outside the ship's chain of command. Goldberg has described the role as something closer to a thank you than a job, and she later reprised the character decades afterward in Star Trek: Picard. Stewart has said he approached his 6-season contract with real skepticism, assuming the series would be canceled quickly and that he'd simply collect a paycheck before returning home to the London stage. He kept his belongings in a rented apartment rather than settling in, prepared to leave on short notice. The cancellation call never came. Ratings grew steadily across the first several seasons, and by the time the show was clearly a hit, Stewart had stayed on for 7 seasons, for feature films, and eventually a return to the role decades later in the series Star Trek: Picard. He has since referred to the show, only half-jokingly, as one of the more unexpected successes of his career, precisely because he spent much of it braced for it to end. The classic episode Datalore introduced Lore, Data's cruel and manipulative double, but early drafts of the story envisioned a very different second android, a female character built for hazardous repair work who was meant to become a romantic interest for Data, exploring whether an android could feel something close to love. Actor Brent Spiner reportedly felt the concept played it too safe and pushed for something with more edge, rather than a companion, a twin with Data's exact appearance, but none of his restraint, driven by arrogance and resentment instead of curiosity. The idea was approved, and Lore became one of the series' most memorable recurring villains, giving Spiner the chance to play two sharply opposed characters within a single television franchise. The Season 5 episode, A Matter of Time, features Berlinghoff Rasmussen, a fast-talking, mysterious visitor claiming to be a historian from the future. The character was reportedly written with Robin Williams in mind, banking on his ability to talk circles around the entire bridge crew while staying impossible to pin down. Williams was interested, but scheduling conflicts with Steven Spielberg's Hook made it impossible for him to take the part. Actor Matt Frewer, well known at the time for his role as Max Headroom, stepped in instead, bringing a jittery, slightly off-kilter energy that suited the character well. The episode is still regarded as one of the stronger standalone mysteries of the series, even though the role reached the screen by a very different route than originally planned. Under showrunner Michael Piller, The Next Generation became one of the first major network-level productions to formally accept script submissions from people with no industry connections or agents at all, just a properly formatted script and a release form. The show reportedly received thousands of unsolicited scripts a year at its peak, and Piller staffed a small team of readers specifically to give every submission genuine consideration rather than dismissing them out of hand. The policy paid off. Yesterday's Enterprise, widely considered one of the best episodes the series ever produced, is generally understood to have originated as an outside spec submission. The open-door approach continued into the following decade before legal concerns eventually shut the program down. But for years, it gave the show a genuinely unusual pipeline of ideas from outside the industry. Between the second and third seasons, Wil Wheaton had a chance to appear in a film directed by Milos Forman, the filmmaker behind One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Amadeus. The production schedules overlapped by roughly a week, and Wheaton has said that when he sought flexibility, he was told his character, Wesley Crusher, was essential to an upcoming episode and couldn't be spared. He turned down the film role to stay with the series, only for that same episode to later be rewritten without his character in it at all. Wheaton left his regular role on the show by the start of Season 4, with Wesley written off to attend Starfleet Academy. The episode's full behind-the-scenes reasoning has never been fully confirmed, but the account, as Wheaton has told it over the years, sits at odds with the show's more optimistic themes about human decency. Dr. Beverly Crusher's actress, Gates McFadden, was let go at the end of the show's first season following creative disagreements with then-showrunner Maurice Hulley, reportedly stemming partly from McFadden questioning why her character's dialogue leaned so heavily on emotional support while male characters handled the technical and command decisions. She was replaced for Season 2 by Diana Muldaur, playing a new character, Dr. Catherine Pulaski, before Muldaur chose not to continue after that single season. By then, Hurley was no longer with the production, and with the ship's sickbay effectively uncast, the surrounding cast and network mail reportedly pushed for McFadden's return. She came back starting with Season 3 and remained through the end of the series, this time with a character who carried noticeably more authority and narrative weight than before. It's a rare case of a cast shakeup correcting itself, and of a performer's pushback ultimately reshaping the character for the better. Taken together, these 15 stories point to something worth sitting with. The show that preached about a confident, harmonious future was, behind the cameras, anything but harmonious. It was assembled out of recycled hardware, borrowed music, shelved scripts, and constant improvisation under pressure, held together by producers who kept changing their minds about almost everything until, gradually, it stopped being an experiment and became a phenomenon. None of the people who lived through that first uncertain season, the writers cycling in and out, the actors unsure whether they'd still have a job in a year, the producers quietly breaking rules they weren't supposed to touch, had any real evidence that any of it was going to work. It worked anyway, and it kept working for decades after anyone involved expected it to. That's really the through line connecting all 15 facts here. Almost nothing about The Next Generation arrived exactly as planned. The captain wasn't the one originally imagined for the role. The Klingon officer wasn't supposed to exist. The theme music wasn't written for this show at all. The villain everyone remembers started life as a runtime patch, and the actress who anchored sickbay for the majority of the series had to be let go and welcomed back before the character finally became what she was always capable of being. Somewhere in all of that trial and error, a production that very easily could have collapsed under its own chaos instead became one of the most influential science fiction shows ever made. Those are 15 facts about Star Trek, the next generation that even longtime fans often miss, from a captain who kept his suitcases packed for years, to a Klingon with nowhere to sit, to a character invented purely to pad a runtime who became impossible to imagine the franchise without. Which one surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and tell us which member of the Enterprise D crew you'd most want to sit down and talk to. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.